Times nature uses ants to bring down elephants. In 1921, deep beneath a restless sea, that old saying was about to become reality. The Great War was over, at least on paper. Treaties had been signed, flags lowered, and speeches delivered about peace and balance. But the oceans had not listened. Beneath their cold surfaces, resentment still moved like a current, quiet, patient, and dangerous. Officially, Germany no longer possessed submarines. The Treaty of Versailles had seen to that. U-boats were scrapped, dismantled, or handed over. Shipyards were shuttered. Naval officers were reassigned, dismissed, or humiliated into silence. Officially. But history rarely moves according to paperwork. On a moonless night off the Baltic coast, near the industrial port of Kiel, a vessel slipped away from shore without ceremony. No flags. No running lights. No recorded departure. On paper, it did not exist. Its hull was narrow, scarred by earlier service, its steel patched and reinforced in places no inspector would ever see. To the men inside, it had a name spoken only in whispers. Kaiser. The name was ironic. There was no emperor anymore. Only memory, bitterness, and a belief, dangerous in its simplicity, that Germany had not truly been defeated at sea. Commanding the submarine was Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Voss, a man in his late 30s with eyes that rarely betrayed what he was thinking. He had served through the final years of the war, seen friends die, and then watched politicians sign away the fleet as if it were a bargaining chip. This voyage was officially an engine trial. In reality, it was a test of something far more fragile, restraint. At 2:14 hours, Kaiser submerged. Inside the submarine, the air grew thick almost immediately. Diesel fumes mixed with oil and sweat, coating the throat. Lights dimmed to a dull amber. Every man moved carefully, deliberately, aware that even a dropped wrench could echo like a shout. At the radio station, Otto Lehmann adjusted his headphones. His job was simple tonight: maintain a short-range check-in with a coastal relay, nothing more. No long transmissions. No risks. He pressed the key. Nothing. Otto frowned and tried again. Still nothing. He switched circuits, checked connections, wiped condensation from the panel. The radio remained dead, silent in a way that made the hair on his arms rise. "Captain," Otto said quietly. "We've lost radio contact." Voss stepped closer, his boots barely making a sound on the metal deck. "Completely?" Otto nodded. "As if it's been cut off." Before Voss could respond, a low vibration passed through the hull. Subtle, but unmistakable. Not mechanical. Not internal. External. The hydrophone operator, Friedrich Weber, stiffened. He leaned closer to his instruments, eyes narrowing. "Propellers," he said. "Large. Heavy displacement." Voss did not need to ask what that meant. Above them, somewhere in the darkness, ships were moving. In 1921, the Baltic was not a battlefield, but it was not peaceful either. Allied patrols still roamed these waters, watching, listening, reminding Germany of its place. Among them was a British task group led by a powerful surface combatant known to sailors on both sides. HMS Ravenska. A steel giant. Well armed. Confident. And dangerously close. Voss ordered a course change, slow and silent. Depth 60 meters. Reduce speed. The submarine obeyed, sinking deeper into the cold. Steel creaked under pressure. Somewhere, water dripped steadily, each drop counted by men who knew how little stood between them and the sea. For nearly an hour, they drifted. Then came the first explosion. Not direct, but close enough to rattle teeth and throw instruments from their mounts. A depth charge. Then another. The British had detected something. Not certainty, but suspicion. Lights flickered. Someone swore softly. No one raised their voice. Engines off, Voss ordered. We drift. This was no longer about stealth. It was about survival. Minutes stretched into hours. Depth charges came and went, each one closer than the last, until suddenly, nothing. Silence returned. Above them, the ships moved away. Or so it seemed. Otto leaned forward again, adjusting his headphones. This time, faintly, something came through, not German. Not friendly. Morse code. English. Fragmented. Weak. But readable. Ravenska, course, stop, inspect. Otto's breath caught. Voss stared at him. What did you hear? Otto swallowed. They're stopping someone, sir. That changed everything. Inspection meant slowed speed. Distracted crews. Searchlights pointed outward, not down. Opportunity. Voss raised the periscope slowly. Through the narrow lens, the night revealed itself in broken pieces, fog, water, light. And then, there it was. HMS Ravenska. Massive. Dominant. Focused entirely on a smaller vessel caught ahead of it. Voss understood the danger immediately. If a submarine attacked now, it would not be a warning. It would be a declaration. A single strike could undo years of forced silence. Behind him, the crew waited. Ants, facing an elephant. Voss did not speak for several long seconds. Then, quietly, he said the words that would change everything. Prepare torpedoes. Heinrich Voss had given the order calmly. Too calmly, perhaps. Inside U Kaiser, no one spoke. Words, at this depth, carried weight. The torpedo room crew moved with practiced precision, hands steady despite the fact that every one of them understood what this meant. This was not war. This was defiance. Tubes 1 and 2, ready, whispered Klaus Richter, the torpedo officer. His voice was low, but it carried through the narrow steel corridors like a confession. Voss remained at the periscope. He adjusted the focus slightly, watching HMS Ravenska through drifting fog. The British battleship was immense, its superstructure cutting a dark shape against the dim Arctic sky, searchlights sweeping the surface ahead where a smaller vessel had been forced to stop. On Ravenska's deck, sailors were busy with inspection procedures. Boats were being lowered. Officers gestured sharply. The battleship had slowed to a crawl. It was the one thing a submarine needed. Range? Voss asked quietly. 800 meters and closing, came the reply from the fire control station. Close. Almost dangerously close. Voss knew the risks better than anyone in that steel tube. If the torpedoes failed, if they ran deep, detonated early, or missed, the submarine would be hunted down within minutes. Ravenska's escorts were nearby. Depth charges were already proven effective. There would be no mercy. Yet something heavier than fear pressed on Voss's chest. Years of humiliation. Years of silence. Years of being told that the sea no longer belonged to them. He remembered the old saying again. Ants. Elephants. Flood tubes, he ordered. Water rushed into the launch tubes. Pressure equalized. Somewhere deep inside the submarine, metal complained. Klaus looked up. Tubes flooded. Voss counted silently. He waited for Ravenska to turn even slightly, exposing more of its flank. The battleship's attention remained fixed forward. Perfect. Angle set, fire control reported. Voss inhaled slowly. Fire, tube 1. The submarine shuddered as the first torpedo left its cradle, propelled into darkness by compressed air. It was gone instantly, no sound, no trace, only a brief vibration through the hull. Fire, tube 2. The second torpedo followed. Two steel predators now ran silently beneath the surface, their gyroscope spinning, their propellers slicing water toward a target that had no idea death was already moving toward it. Inside Kaiser, time slowed. No one spoke. Every man counted in his own way, heartbeats, breaths, seconds. Through the periscope, Voss watched Ravenska's searchlights continue their methodical sweep. On deck, sailors laughed at something. A British officer leaned over a railing, unaware. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then the sea exploded. The first torpedo struck Ravenska amidships. A towering column of water and flame erupted, metal screaming as the explosion tore into the battleship's hull. The second impact followed seconds later, farther aft, twisting steel and shattering internal compartments. Searchlights vanished. Sirens screamed. Smoke and fire poured into the sky. For a brief, horrifying moment, Ravenska seemed to bend, its massive frame warping as if the sea itself were trying to break it in half. On Kaiser, no one cheered. Voss lowered the periscope. "Dive," he said. 150 meters. Full power. The submarine angled sharply downward. Engines roared to life, pushing the vessel deeper as fast as physics would allow. Above them, chaos ruled. Ravenska was not sinking, not yet. Battleships were built to survive punishment. But it was crippled. Fires raged. Compartments flooded. Power flickered. And more importantly, every British ship in the area now knew exactly where the attack had come from. Depth charges began falling within minutes. The first detonations were distant, but rapidly growing closer. Each blast slammed into the water like a hammer, sending pressure waves through Kaiser's hull. Lights flickered. A gauge shattered. Someone fell and was dragged back to their feet. "Hold course." Voss shouted. "Do not change depth." The submarine groaned as it descended beyond what the engineers preferred. Steel plates flexed. Rivets complained. The ocean pressed inward with merciless patience. Another explosion. Closer. Then another, close enough to knock a man unconscious. "We're taking water in compartment 3, someone yelled. "Seal it." Voss replied instantly. "Now." They sealed it. A man remained inside. No one spoke his name. Depth charges continued for what felt like hours. The British destroyers were relentless, circling, listening, dropping explosives in carefully calculated patterns. The submarine ran silent between bursts, engines cut, drifting like a corpse. At one point, the hull tilted dangerously. Water sloshed somewhere it shouldn't have. The pressure gauge crept toward red. Klaus whispered, "If they drop one more that close." He didn't finish. Then, suddenly, the explosion stopped. Only the low groan of the submarine and the pounding of blood in ears remained. Minutes passed. Then more. Friedrich leaned closer to his hydrophones. "They're pulling away," he said slowly. "Multiple propellers. Heading west." Voss did not relax. Not yet. Another 10 minutes passed before he spoke. "Surface, slowly." Kaiser rose cautiously, breaking through the water like a wounded animal. Cold air rushed in as the hatch cracked open. The crew breathed deeply, greedily. Far away, on the horizon, a faint glow marked where HMS Ravenska burned. It had not sunk. But it had been humiliated. And that was worse. Voss knew the consequences would not be immediate, but they would come. An attack like this could not be hidden. Someone would ask questions. Someone would demand answers. And Germany's silence would be broken. He turned away from the hatch. "Set course home," he said quietly. No one replied. Because they all understood what had just happened. The ant had bitten. And the elephant would never forget. The sea did not forgive easily. By dawn, the Baltic had changed its mood. The fog thickened, the wind sharpened, and the water took on a darker shade, as if it had already chosen sides. Inside HMS Ravenska, damage control teams fought a different battle. Fires were contained, flooding slowed, and the ship's massive engines were coaxed back to partial life. She was wounded, humiliated, but alive. And she was angry. British command did not need confirmation to understand what had happened. A German submarine, officially non-existent, had struck a Royal Navy battleship in peacetime waters. That was not an incident. That was a message. Orders moved faster than ships. Patrol patterns were rewritten. Listening stations activated. Destroyers were redirected. The Baltic became a net tightening strand by strand. On Kaiser, Heinrich Voss sensed the shift before anyone said a word. The hydrophones picked it up first. Multiple contacts, Friedrich reported quietly. Not just behind us. Ahead. To port. To starboard. Voss closed his eyes for a brief second. They were being boxed in. He knew the theory. He had studied it years ago. A submarine could evade one pursuer, sometimes two. But when surface ships coordinated, sharing bearings, predicting movement, cutting off routes, the sea itself became an enemy. Depth 100, Voss ordered. Course northeast. Slow. The submarine adjusted, slipping into darker water. The men aboard moved automatically now, exhaustion and adrenaline blending into something numb. Otto sat at the radio, hands hovering uselessly over dead equipment. He had tried every workaround. Every spare component. The radio remained silent. They were alone. Hours passed. No explosions. No sonar pings. Just the hum of the submarine and the constant pressure of the sea. That was when Friedrich stiffened again. They've stopped searching, he whispered. Voss looked up sharply. Stopped? Yes. They're waiting. Waiting was worse. Waiting meant calculation. Waiting meant confidence. They think we have to come up, Klaus said quietly. Air. Batteries. He was right. Kaiser was not built for extended submerged endurance. Its batteries would not last forever. Nor would its crew. Voss studied the chart spread across the table. Every route led toward patrol zones. Every depth contour became a trap when the enemy anticipated it. There was only one place they were unlikely to search aggressively. The shallows. Prepare for shallow running, Voss said. The order drew looks. Shallow water was dangerous for a submarine, less room to maneuver, greater risk of grounding or detection. But danger was relative. They edged closer to the seabed, skimming above it like a shadow. Sand scraped faintly against steel. Every man listened for the sound of tearing metal that would mean the end. Instead, there was only silence. Above them, destroyers prowled deeper water, sonar sweeping emptiness. For a time, it worked. Then came the aircraft. The sound was unmistakable, a distant, growing drone. Planes circling low, scanning the surface. They're widening the net, Friedrich said. Voss nodded. They won't find us down here. But they would find something. At mid-afternoon, Ravenska transmitted again. British intercepts later would describe the tone as cold, controlled. The battleship could not chase. But she could direct. Destroyers adjusted course. Depth charge patterns shifted toward the shallows. Aircraft dropped markers, floating buoys that listened. The sea filled with ears. The first depth charge in the shallows detonated dangerously close. The blast slammed Kaiser sideways, throwing men against bulkheads. A valve burst. Steam hissed violently. Contain it. Voss shouted. The second explosion followed almost immediately. Then the third. This was no probing attack. This was a kill attempt. Kaiser lurched downward, scraping the seabed hard enough to tear paint and metal. The hull screamed in protest. "We're grounded," someone yelled. Voss did not hesitate. "Reverse engines." Now. The engines roared. The submarine shuddered free just as another depth charge exploded directly above them. Lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the interior. For a moment, there was only breathing and the sound of rushing water. Emergency lights flickered on. "Report." Voss demanded. "Flooding controlled. Battery damage, still functional. Hydrophones, partially operational." They were alive. Barely. Friedrich listened again, sweat dripping from his brow. "They think they hit us," he said slowly. "They're spreading out." A mistake. Voss seized the moment. "All engines. Maximum speed. Course north-northwest." Kaiser surged forward, using the confusion to break away. The destroyers reacted too late, depth charges falling behind the submarine's path. For the next 2 hours, the chase fractured. The British lost contact, then regained it, then lost it again. Each time, Kaiser slipped just beyond reach. As night fell, the Baltic grew darker, colder, more unforgiving. And somewhere behind them, HMS Ravenska still burned, still afloat, but damaged beyond pride. Her captain stood on the bridge, watching the sea. He did not know where the submarine was. But he knew one thing with certainty. This would not end quietly. On Kaiser, Heinrich Voss leaned against the periscope housing, eyes bloodshot, mind racing. They had survived the attack. They had survived the counterattack. But survival now carried a price. The world would not forget this night. And neither would the sea. HMS Ravenska refused to die quickly. By nightfall, the fires that had torn through her midsection were finally under control, but the damage beneath the waterline told a different story. Compartments remained flooded. Bulkhead strained. Pumps worked without rest, fighting a sea that did not care about rank or reputation. The battleship was wounded, and worse, exposed. Her captain, Commodore James Harrington, stood on the bridge wrapped in a heavy coat, his eyes fixed on the dark water ahead. He had been at sea long enough to know when a ship's strength was beginning to betray it. They had underestimated the threat. Not the submarine itself, but the moment. Ravenska was not meant to be here, slowing to conduct inspections, turning her broadside toward uncertainty. She had been designed to dominate, not to linger. Now, every decision weighed heavier. The destroyers reported in. Sonar contacts were inconsistent. The submarine had slipped through the net, but Harrington knew better than to assume escape. "She's still out there," he said quietly. The sea answered with silence. Below the surface, Kaiser ran deep and fast, batteries draining at an alarming rate. Men moved sluggishly now, fatigue dulling reactions. Faces were smeared with oil and sweat. Hands shook when they thought no one was looking. Heinrich Voss felt the pressure more keenly than any gauge could measure. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. If they surfaced now, they would be seized. If they returned to port, the world would demand explanations. If they vanished, they would become a legend, and a warning. None of the options ended cleanly. Friedrich's voice broke the silence. New contact. Large displacement. Bearing southwest. Voss froze. That was not a destroyer. It was Ravenska. She was moving again. Slowly. Painfully. But deliberately. The wounded elephant was charging. Harrington had made his decision. Ravenska would not retreat under suspicion. She would pursue, limping if necessary, and force the truth into the open. If a German submarine existed, it would be dragged into the light. Above, aircraft reappeared, flares briefly painting the sea in harsh white. The destroyers closed in again, guided by Ravenska's commands. Ukaiser felt the pressure before the explosions came. Depth charges returned, methodical, patient, closer than before. One detonated beneath the stern, lifting the submarine violently. Men were thrown from their feet. A valve tore loose. Water poured in. Compartment 5 flooding, someone shouted. Seal it. Voss ordered. This time, sealing meant leaving 2 men behind. No one argued. The submarine groaned as if alive, steel plates bending beyond their limits. Another explosion followed, so close it felt like the ocean itself had struck them. We can't take much more, Klaus said, his voice tight. Hull integrity is failing. Voss understood. They were running out of sea. He made the hardest choice of the night. Prepare last torpedo, he said. Klaus stared at him. Sir. Ravenska is damaged. Slowed. She's directing the hunt. End that, and the net collapses. It was madness. Launching a torpedo now meant revealing their position completely. It meant committing to a final exchange with a battleship still capable of destroying them. But it also meant something else. Ending it. Voss raised the periscope one last time. The image that filled the lens was unmistakable. HMS Ravenska, scarred and burning faintly, cutting through the water with grim determination. Destroyers flanked her, but they were spread wide, too wide. She was vulnerable. Range? Voss asked. 700 meters, came the reply. Closing slowly. Voss did not hesitate. Fire. The final torpedo left the tube like a verdict. Seconds dragged. On Ravenska's bridge, Harrington felt the impact before he heard it. The explosion tore through the weakened hull where earlier damage had already compromised her defenses. Steel gave way. Water surged in uncontrollably. The ship listed sharply. Flooding, uncontrollable, someone yelled. Harrington grabbed the rail as the deck tilted beneath his feet. He knew this moment, the one officers feared most. There would be no saving her. Abandon ship, he ordered. Below decks, chaos erupted. Lifeboats were lowered. Men ran, slipped, shouted orders no one could hear. The sea poured into Ravenska as if claiming a debt. From Ukaiser's periscope, Heinrich Voss watched the battleship begin to die. There was no triumph in his eyes. Only understanding. The elephant fell slowly, majestically, the sea swallowing steel and pride alike. Voss lowered the periscope. Dive, he said quietly. Deep. Behind them, HMS Ravenska slipped beneath the waves, leaving only oil, debris, and survivors scattered across the cold surface. The destroyers rushed to rescue, abandoning the hunt. The net collapsed. Ukaiser vanished into the depths. The sea closed over HMS Ravenska without ceremony. By dawn, there was nothing left of the battleship except scattered debris and a thin sheen of oil stretching across the gray water. Survivors clung to wreckage, some rescued quickly, others not at all. Official reports would later describe the loss in careful language: catastrophic flooding following a torpedo impact. No speculation. No accusations. For the Royal Navy, the priority was control. Rescue ships recovered men. Destroyers maintained patrols. Aircraft circled until fuel ran low. And then, quietly, the order was given to stand down. The submarine was gone. Deep beneath the Baltic, Ukaiser moved without lights, without sound, without celebration. The men aboard did not speak of victory. They sat where they were, breathing recycled air, listening to the hum of engines that now sounded older than before. Heinrich Voss stood alone in the control room. He replayed the night again and again in his mind, the inspection lights on Ravenska, the moment of hesitation, the order to fire, the final torpedo that ended everything. He had made every decision deliberately. There had been no panic. And yet, he felt no relief. When Kaiser finally surfaced hours later, the sky was colorless, the horizon empty. No ships. No aircraft. Just water and distance. Otto brought the radio back online. Static gave way to a coded signal from shore, brief, cold, unmistakable. Return immediately. No transmissions. No incident acknowledged. That was all. No congratulations. No questions. No recognition. Only erasure. Kaiser returned to port under cover of routine. No flags were raised. No logs recorded the patrol. Engineers worked through the night to strip identifying marks, to remove equipment that should not exist, to prepare the submarine for dismantling. Within weeks, the vessel was broken apart. Steel that had survived war and depth charges was cut down quietly, piece by piece, as if destroying the evidence might also destroy the memory. The crew was dispersed. Some were reassigned. Some were dismissed. Some simply vanished back into civilian life, carrying something heavy that could not be spoken. Heinrich Voss never went to sea again. Officially, he resigned for health reasons. Unofficially, he understood the truth: men who proved that peace was fragile were inconvenient. In Britain, the loss of HMS Ravenska became an anomaly. An investigation was opened, then narrowed, then quietly closed. The final report cited unidentified underwater explosion. Newspapers speculated briefly, then moved on. The world was tired of war stories. No nation wanted to admit that peace had almost collapsed in 1921, not over ideology, but over pride. Years later, a junior analyst would stumble across fragments of intercepted signals, patrol logs that didn't quite align, survivor testimonies that hinted at something deeper. His questions went unanswered. His report was shelved. History chose silence. And silence chose survival. As for the saying, sometimes nature uses ants to bring down elephants. It was true. But what the saying never mentioned was this: the ant does not walk away unchanged. The ant carries the weight of what it has done, long after the elephant is gone. And the sea. The sea remembers everything.